Hello again. Uh, this is Module 5B, continuation of the legal structure aspect of a new venture. What kind of organization, what kind of legal structure do you want for your new business? All right, and we left off, we will then go into issues of operational issues. We left off talking about limited liability companies, and we're going to move down to corporations. We're going to look at nonprofits, and then go into another aspect after we finish the structure, look at kinds of things you have to deal with running a business. Again, in the last lecture, I mentioned sole proprietors, partnerships, and the advantages and disadvantages of each. And we talked about limited liability companies, which, as I said, is at this point in time the favored choice. Most new businesses wind up starting either as an LLC or as an S corporation. Now, let's talk about corporations. The first thing is that in New Jersey, a corporation is a corporation is a corporation. The concept of a C Corp versus an S Corp is a tax election. It's a form that you fill out via either paper or the website that in the last module that I referred you to, that gives you the ability to be taxed differently. Essentially, an S corporation, you don't get taxed as a corporation. The profits or losses flow through to the personal tax returns of either the sole owner, if it's a sole proprietor, or to the partners, if it's a partnership. All right, and it goes in percentages according to their percentage ownership of the partnership. So a corporation is a corporation. In some states, particularly in the Midwest, they haven't updated their laws yet, and they do have one set of rules for what they call closed or close corporations, and another for general corporations, or what would be considered Cs. But again, that's not the way New Jersey does it. And again, even if you do business in other states and you register with those states, your organizational issues and tax issues are governed by the state where you're incorporated, and that's, in this case, what we're saying is New Jersey. Well, that being said, the idea of a corporation is it's governed by its written bylaws. Who does what? Who's responsible? What the actual business the corporation's going to be in? How it elects its board of directors, all kinds of issues. Now, fortunately, you don't have to be creative and know all the details. There are lots of forms out there, lots of boilerplate. And I mentioned that corporate book in the last module, say from places like Allstate. I believe Bloomberg Legal Forms also has them. When you get the corporate book, it's got the fill-in-the-blank bylaws, so you just follow through and write it in ink, fill in the blanks with the names and information that is necessary, and it makes it very, very easy. I don't know if you know how many people it takes start a corporation, how many people do you need to be in a corporation? 2, 3, a dozen? The answer is one. It could be a one-person corporation. Nobody else. You own 100% of that business. It is yours. It's a corporation, but you own it all. But what you have to realize is that even though you're the one person who's involved, the only person, you wear different hats at different points and times. You do different jobs. The shareholders or stockholders actually own the business. Like AT&T, you buy shares of stock in AT&T. You own a piece of AT&T. The shareholders, their loss is limited to the investment. If AT&T goes bankrupt or Lucent gets into trouble as they did, the value of your investment may go to zero, or at least, or less than $1 per share. But you're not liable for their bills. Nobody comes knocking at your door as a stockholder of Lucent to say, hey, you owe $2,000 as your fair share of their bad debt. Doesn't happen. In turn, the shareholders or stockholders elect the board of directors. And that board of directors governs the business, sets strategic direction. You may bring in your important lenders, some key people, maybe even a key customer. And they meet once a quarter, typically. And again, look at the big picture. The corporation is actually run by the officers, and they're appointed or hired by the board of directors. And there are 4 officers by law: a president, a vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. And their authority is in exactly that order. The president is number 1 person, vice president number 2, secretary number 3, and treasurer number 4, of course. This doesn't vary. And again, if you're a one-person corporation, you're kind of all 4. Please note that the term CEO, Chief Executive Officer, CEO, is not a legal term. It's a functional term. Who's kind of in charge? The CEO, depending upon the way the business is actually run, could be the president, could be the chairman of the board of directors, if the board of directors stays that much involved in the business, or in some large corporations, the CEO of a given operating unit might be a senior vice president. It's important, the last line here that's currently on the slide, is that, again, if they are negligent, just as I said before, I don't care what kind of organization you put together, if you are personally negligent, if you do something you shouldn't have, or if you don't do something that you should have, you have personal liability, and none of these corporate forms are going to shield you from that. And things like not paying taxes, knowingly putting out defective products, things that are dangerous, the officers of the company can have both civil liability and criminal liability. They can go to jail. Lastly, the officers hire the employees, and as long as they're doing their job the way they're told, they don't have liability. Again, it goes back to the officers. Here's kind of just a summary chart that gives you the information that you need. C Corp is separate, and I would say that even an S corporation is a separate entity. I mean, these things can go on forever. Here again is a summary chart. We'll talk about double taxation under the taxation module, and we'll see that one of the disadvantages of a corporation is that they're subject to double tax, but that's not always the case. Again, generalities are tough. There are lots and lots of different shades of gray. You can sell stock. You can share stock with employees. With a C corporation, you can have an unlimited number of stockholders. You'll see in a moment that in S you can't. Stock may be easily sold if you've gone public, and we'll talk about public offerings later in the course. And we'll see that it's easy to buy and sell stock, bring in new owners, raise new capital. Lots and lots of advantages in doing that. In a non-public or privately held corporation, there are usually restrictions on that. And again, when we talk about raising funds, we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are some advantages. And of course, there are disadvantages of a corporation. And of course, if you're just a small shareholder, like you own a couple of shares of AT&T, you don't really have a voice in management. You're just there hoping to make some money and hoping they manage it properly. The S corporation, or subchapter S, and the reason why it's called that is it's a subchapter in the Internal Revenue Code. The subchapter S, which stands for Small Business Corporation, enables the new business to pass through profits or losses to the owners. Okay, if you notice the disadvantage, one of the disadvantages on the prior slide of a C Corp is that the losses cannot be deducted from the shareholder's other income. You just don't make any money. All right, hopefully over the long term you do. However, one of the advantages of an S is that you pass through, and when we look at taxation, we'll see that sometimes you want to pass it through, sometimes you don't. However, traditionally, a new business, when it starts up, loses money. You have a lot of marketing costs, a lot of startup costs. It takes you longer for your business to get profitable than you expected, and as a result, you have losses. Well, the idea of the subchapter S is that the government allows you on your tax return to take those losses as deductions from your other income. So if you have a day job or a night job as a waiter or something like that, and you make $40,000 in the year, and your little side business is running and you lost $10,000 during the year, you can take that $10,000 as a deduction. It comes over from Schedule B, comes over onto the front page of your tax return, Form 1040, and you deduct that $10,000 from the $40,000 of your day job, and you are taxed only on $30,000. In essence, the federal government and the state governments are helping to subsidize your new business, your small entrepreneurial business, by giving you a tax break. And that is very important to most companies early on. Again, as an LLC, limited liability company, also has the ability to be taxed in this fashion. So it is, again, there are trade-offs that we'll see in a moment between there are trade-offs between the LLC and the S. Here's a summary slide. There's a discrepancy in that slide. It says 100 members. The current rules are 75. But here's as a practical matter is what we deal with when somebody comes in to sit down and say, well, what kind of structure should I pick for my new little business? And assuming that it's a limited number of people, a typical startup, you can either use an S Corp for the reasons that I just mentioned, or an LLC for basically the same reasons. Now, the limited liability company does offer you some advantages or pluses. One is that it is much more flexible in terms of its choice, how it's managed, how it's run. Very, very flexible. You do not have to distribute the profits strictly based on percentage ownership as you do in a corporation. You can have, and we'll see that at the next slide, you can have different ways of compensating the members of the LLC. You can have voting or non-voting stock. If one of your relatives wants to buy into the business, wants to invest in the business, but you don't want to give them a say in management, you could give them non-voting stock. Now, if they're stupid enough to take it, that's their problem. But most people, if they're going to invest in the business, are going to say, hey, if I'm putting up my hard-earned money to invest in your business, I want to have some say in how the business is run. One of the advantages of an LLC is that you can organize it in a number of ways. You can have a manager, whatever title, director, managing director, chief executive officer, whatever you want to print on the title card, on the business card. But that person would run it. And maybe in, say, like a real estate investment, you have say, an apartment house, you would have one person as the manager, worrying about that property, and the other members of the LLC, investors in the LLC, would be just passive investors, not really take an active part in supervising and managing the property. On the other hand, there are some businesses, and some businesses that I've helped get started, where the members want to share the management authority, and no one person is in charge. And they say, look, there are three of us, and all three of us are going to have to agree, or maybe at least 2 out of 3 agree on any decision and any contract and anything that's signed. Maybe 2 out of 3 have to sign the check. Maybe all 3 people, all 3 owners have to sign the check. That's a possibility. From the negative side of an LLC, that flexibility also has a downside, as most things do. If you're particularly in a business-to-business environment, if you go to a Verizon or a Sprint and you're going to try and do business with them, they're going to say, wait a minute, we want to see your operating agreement. We need to see your legal documents that show how you are organized. Do you have one manager, and is that manager you, or do all 3 or all however many number of members you have to agree? Do you have the authority to commit the company? or do you have to get the buy-in of your partners? LLCs vary from state to state, although they're trying to standardize them. New Jersey, you can have a one-member LLC. Some states require a minimum of two, but all 50 states recognize LLCs. Not all foreign countries recognize LLCs, so there can be a problem there. On the other hand, an S Corp has been around since the 30s. It's very well known. A lot of defined law. LLCs, by the way, really started back in 1987, so they haven't been around that long, but just about 20 years. But they're getting there. But S corporations are very, very well known, and lots of law. The officers run the company. The president is number one, and can unilaterally, by him or herself, bind the company. So if the president signs a contract as president of the corporation, it is legally binding on the corporation. Doesn't have to go to the board of directors, doesn't have to go to anybody. Unlike an LLC, where, again, if your LLC is organized so that you're going to share the management responsibility, then you might have to have all three people sign off on it. From a negative standpoint, the S Corp has a max of 75 stockholders at present, and they have to be U.S. taxpayers, not citizens. That can cause a problem. Have one company that we set up where one person is here, two people here, here in the United States doing the marketing and getting business, and the other three owners of the company are back in India managing the people actually doing the software code. There's a software company and basically contract software. Got their start back with the Y2K stuff that had to be done. A lot of old COBOL code that had to be updated and things like that. But here, since 3 of the 5 were not U.S. taxpayers, we could not use an S corporation. We had to use an LLC, and that was one of the concerns. Also, there's only one class of stock, common and voting stock. No preferred stock, no special deals, and you share profits based upon your ownership. From a stock standpoint, you can issue as many as you want, and the company value and value per share is the value per share is the company value divided by the number of shares that you have. And the idea is you want to keep it at a manageable number. You cannot sell a piece of a share. So if we only issued one share of stock and I'm the only owner, that's fine. I own that one share represents 100% of the company. But if I want to sell a piece of the company, I've got to issue more shares so that I can sell 10%. And your ownership percentage is the number of shares you own over the total number of shares. And you divide the profits based on percentage ownership, and they go out as dividends. If you own stock in any company and you get a check once a quarter, hopefully, representing your share of the profits for that quarter, that is taxable to you as a dividend. LLCs, as I mentioned, work essentially that way, but LLCs have more flexibility in that you can alter the way you do that, the way you pay the profits or divide the profits. You could have other factors in there, such as number of customers brought in, who did what portion of what work, specific jobs, the profitability of specific projects and things like that. So there, again, the LLC has a number of variants on that you can look at that for the new startup really isn't important, but as you grow, may be applicable. Okay, one issue we ought to look at is multiple organizations. And we have a company here. And let's say this company up here, up on the top here, is Bob's Consulting. Okay? If you remember that from first module. And, Bob is doing his networking and hardware and software installation and that kind of stuff. Well, suppose Bob says, well, gee, I've got a possibility. I think there's an opportunity for training, for selling training on this stuff. Okay, we want to start a training business. Well, we ought to split it out. Why? Well, if we don't, we're going to be very hard-pressed to find out whether going into the training business was a smart move. Was it profitable? What we want to do is keep a separate set of books. Separate the income and expenses for the training business from the income and expenses for the networking, hardware, and software installation business. So we might want to do that as a division. What do we have to do to set up a division? Not much. Okay? Set up a separate chart of accounts, a separate set of books. Print some letterhead, the training division of Bob's Consulting Company. Okay. That's all we need. We have a hardware software division and we have a training division. Now the key is that for that division they're one legal entity. Let's take a different scenario. Suppose Bob's real estate venture owns two apartment houses, apartment house A and apartment house B, okay, on the right. And we just operate them as divisions. Suppose apartment house A goes down in flames, figuratively or literally. People get hurt, there are all kinds of damages to be paid. Well, apartment house A goes defunct, but what happens is it brings with it apartment house B, the whole entity. It's one legal entity. All of these assets, all of the assets of this whole thing are up for grabs to pay those damages, that liability. So what do? You set up a subsidiary, a separate corporation, a separate LLC under the original. So apartment house A is a separate corporation or LLC, and apartment house B is a separate corporation or LLC. Again, if one goes down in flames, that one, in this case, would go bankrupt, but it would not affect apartment house B. Up at this level, the value of the stock of apartment house A would go to zero, but it wouldn't affect the value of the stock of B, nor of this. Up at this level, what would this be called? Bob's real estate investment. What is this entity up here? It's a holding corporation or a holding company. A holding company. Why? Because its only reason for existing is to hold or own the stock of these two operating entities. And as it says at the bottom here, again, a lot of flexibility. You can consolidate, report them separately. You do have to file tax returns on each, but you can consolidate them up to the level so that if you have profits from one and losses from another, they can offset each other. So there are ways to do it. Let's take a look at nonprofits. Lots of kinds of nonprofits, but typically what's meant by a nonprofit is what's sometimes called a 501c3 corporation. 501c3 is the section of the Internal Revenue Code that deals with nonprofits or tax-exempt nonprofits. It's kind of a misnomer. Many nonprofits are extremely profitable. The thing is that there are no stockholders. There's a board of trustees, and nobody gets dividends. Nobody puts money in their pocket. The profits, the excess of revenues over expenses gets plowed back into the good works of the business. The nonprofit has managers, directors, employees, and as it says, you can take a reasonable salary. What's a reasonable salary? Who determines a reasonable salary? Well, the answer is that you and the Internal Revenue Service determine what's reasonable. And the guideline is that the job should be paid whatever it is worth in the commercial market. So, Harvard Foundation, which controls the investments of the endowments that have been left to Harvard University. The portfolio manager, the director who runs that foundation, manages a $47 billion portfolio. His compensation as a nonprofit manager was in excess of $25 million per year. Why? Because if he were managing that kind of portfolio for a profit-making organization on Wall Street, he'd make at least that much money, and probably a lot more. So again, you don't have to, nonprofits are not necessarily poor. Just have to do it right. Now, little soccer clubs and not even soccer clubs these days, but small organizations that are just getting together can start as an unincorporated or association. However, if you're going to really do anything as a nonprofit, you should incorporate. And again, you go to the same website that we looked at before, that New Jersey Business Gateway Services, and instead of $125, it's $75. And again, you can get a book with the bylaws and all that kind of stuff from Allstate, and it's very much like a profit-making corporation. Same procedure, except that you say it's nonprofit. Now, usually, when we talk about nonprofits, there's really three different plateaus. As I said, registering is easy. The second step is to become tax exempt, and you have to file a form with the Internal Revenue Service because that's a status that they give you. And they can deny it if they think you're not truly a tax exempt 501c3. And the third plateau is that you want your contributors to be able to deduct their contributions to you, and therefore you want to be a public charity and not a private foundation. You don't want to be a Prudential Foundation or a Ford Foundation, where all the money's coming from Ford. You want, if you are a public charity, you have to go through these wickets, and again, there are processes and lots of documentation on how to do that. Well, we mentioned legal liability or limited liability, and that comes from the LLCs or corporations. The question is who does it protect? Well, it protects the investors primarily. And I've talked about that and said, worst case, you lose your investment. Also, in the services businesses, I've had a number of situations where people who have been laid off and want to go as a contract worker or a contractor working for a big company, the company will say, hey, we don't want you deemed an employee by the IRS, and we'll talk about that when we talk about independent contractors versus employees under taxes. So they'll say, hey, if you're going to be a consultant, set up your own little business. And we have a number of 1 or 2 person companies that are just little consulting companies, basically in the IT arena. I've mentioned this several times about personal liability. Also, watch out for personal guarantees. If you get a loan from a bank or a real estate lease from a landlord, commercial lease, your utility agreements, typically on the end, someplace at the very end, will be a personal guarantee, which says if the company does not pay this bill or live up to this contract, I will be personally responsible for it, meaning your assets, your personal belongings, and if you do that, you've just given away your shield, because you now have personal liability just as if you were a sole proprietor or a partner. But banks didn't stay in business, and real estate companies don't stay in business by being stupid. So they're going to try and get a personal guarantee from you, and you may have to do it, but just realize it. Well, on the negligence issue anyway, try and get insurance. There are different kinds of insurance available, and sometimes you can do that. Okay, let's look at the second piece here. Operating issues. Your business is now up and running. You got some customers perhaps, you've got employees, you got things going along. You're going to have to sign contracts, sometimes contracts with customers, sometimes contracts with suppliers. All right? Contracts could also be a loan from a bank. If you are an LLC or a corporation, sign it as such. Never sign it, and people do this all the time, Bob Zeiss. That's all they sign, or Robert J. Zeiss. You just signed it personally. You've taken personal responsibility. If you are trying to keep that shield, that limited liability shield, to protect you, you sign it as Robert J. Zeiss, President, XYZ Corporation, or Managing Director, XYZ LLC, whatever your title is, but use the official title. Your contracts have to have your warranty, whatever kind of warranty you're going to give with your product or service, it better be in there. If you have disclaimers as to, things that this is not good for, do not use under certain circumstances, do not give to children under 5. It's got to be in there. Also, your payment terms. In the commercial market space, there are things called prompt payment terms. Typically 2%, 10 days, net 30 is very common, which means that if you pay my invoice within 10 days of receipt, or 10 days of mailing, within 10 days of you're getting it, essentially, you can deduct 2% from the invoice as a prompt payment discount. This way I get my money faster. On the other side of the coin, you may put terms in there that says, this invoice is payable upon receipt. Any balance open more than 30 days will incur a 1% finance charge. It's a way to get people to pay the bill within 30 days. You can do that, but you got to say so in your contract. If you don't say so, you can't charge them interest. You also have to deal with employees. You, as the owner of the company, the employer, have to verify that that person can legally work in this country. Form I-9. Used to be, they have to have a green card. You can get in trouble for hiring an illegal alien. New Jersey has its own form, and basically that's to catch child support deadbeats. So, be aware. The employee has to tell the employer what they're allowed in terms of how many deductions they are allowed to claim on their taxes. This is for setting up the payroll tax withholding and things like that. W-9 is for foreigners. We will talk in a later module about employees versus independent contractors, whether the person is paid with a W-2 at the end of the year or a Form 1099 if they're an independent contractor. You may want your employees to sign a trade secret agreement, and we'll talk about trade secrets in the next module under intellectual property, but saying that they will not tell anybody else about your great ideas or your great processes that you consider proprietary. You may also want them to sign a non-disclosure agreement, a non-competition agreement, which says basically that if they go to work, if they leave your company, that they can't work either for themselves or for anybody else within a three-year period or 2-year period within a radius of 50 or 100 miles of your business. Again, it varies from industry to industry, but they are important. One of the problems that non-competition agreements can come up with is we tell folks when you're starting a business, and we talked about this at the beginning, was get to know the industry that you're in, learn something about the business. Well, sometimes that means taking a job in that industry, and you either knowingly or inadvertently sign a non-competition agreement, and after a year or two you quit and go out on your own and start your own business basically in competition with your ex-employer, and they start waiving this non-competition agreement that you signed and threatening legal action. And it does happen. Usually you got to buy your way out of it, make some sort of arrangement or deal with the ex-employer. Here's where you can find a bunch of forms. There are lots and lots of forms out there for contracts, for employment agreements, for non-competition agreements, things like that. Talk briefly about insurance. If you are a corporation, you have to have workers' comp, which pays your employees, even if there's only one person. If there's a corporation, you are an employee of the corporation. Pays your employees if they get hurt on the job. You may want a business operations policy, and what that covers is usually your equipment, your building could cover losses if you're out of business for a while, but that tends to get expensive for a little business. If you're running your business out of your house, do not be misled. Do not think that your homeowner's policy or renter's policy is going to cover your business equipment and your supplies and stuff like that. It does not. Your homeowner's policy specifically excludes that. So if you've got running a business out of your house, and you've got computers and files and various kinds of stuff, get a business policy that covers that. All right, from a liability standpoint and from fire and theft. A typical business operations policy for a small business runs about $800 a year. It's not very, very expensive. You can get life insurance on key people. That's a possibility to fund things like this buy-sell agreement that we've talked about. Business expense, all right? In some industries, you can get insurance to protect you from your own mistakes. Doctors and lawyers call it malpractice insurance. Accountants and real estate people call it errors and omissions or omissions and errors policies. Consultants can sometimes get that, but that's a little bit more expensive, so you have to shop around. That can get pretty pricey. If you're in the kind of business that you're going to use a subcontractor, all right, somebody else, like construction, make sure that they have insurance. Get their employer ID number and get a certificate of insurance unless your insurance is going to cover them. And that gets a little pricier. Okay. Leases and zoning. Unlike an apartment or house rent, most commercial leases are not gross leases. The exception is if you go over to the Small Business Incubator here at NJIT, that is a gross lease. They don't charge you anything else. They charge you so much per month for your space, and that's it. However, most commercial leases are net leases, or sometimes called triple net leases, which means that in addition to your base rent, you pay your fair share, your percentage share, of the real estate tax, the common area maintenance, and the common area insurance. Okay, so what? Well, the issue is that if the basic rent is $1,000 a month, that's not what you're going to pay. You have to find out, and the lease frequently won't tell you, you have to pay, again, your percentage of the common area maintenance on top of the $1,000, and the real estate taxes on top of that, and the common area insurance, so that your monthly rent may be $1,300 a month, $1,400 a month, $1,500 a month, which could make the difference between profit and loss, the difference between success or failure. You have to find out what those numbers are. They are typically not mentioned in the lease. You have to go to the landlord, find out what it was. Another way of putting a lease together is on percentage of receipts. Shopping malls are big on that. What they do is they make you this terrific deal. They say, look, we'll charge you $1,000 a month, which is a bargain, but on top of that, we want 1% of your gross receipts. This way, if you make a lot of money, we make more money. If you're not successful quickly, we share your pain. And that works, okay? How do they know what your gross receipts are? And don't forget, this is not profit or loss. This is the money coming into the cash register, either in cash or a credit card. Gross sales has nothing to do with after overhead. This is gross sales. Your cash registers are connected to their servers in the basement, and they know exactly how much sales you're making daily. Commercial leases typically have an escalator clause. Your rent is $1,000 per month for the first year, goes up to $1,100 per month the second year, and so forth. And typically you lease by the square foot per year. The thing they quote you is so much per square foot. So what you do is you multiply times the number of square feet that you're renting and divide by 12 to get your monthly rent. The other issue is who pays. What about alterations? Again, unlike commercial residential real estate that has all this landlord-tenant law applied to it, commercial leases, none of that applies. It's whatever you can negotiate. And you have to decide, along with the landlord, if you put in fixtures, if you put in fancy mirrors, say for a dance studio or a gym, can you take them when you leave? Can you take them off the wall, or do you have to leave them? You know, if you put down expensive carpeting, can you rip it up? Depends on the lease. You have to check and see if you can run the business where you want to run it. And don't depend upon the real estate agent or the landlord. Go to the town. Go to the building inspector. Walk into the municipal building. Find a construction department, and say, "Hey, I want to run this kind of business. Am I allowed to?" Depending upon the business, they may say yes or no. Towns, particularly in New Jersey, are tough on zoning. You may only be allowed to be open till 9 o'clock at night. You may have to be closed on Sundays. All kinds of rules. Find out before you commit. And lastly, don't buy an abandoned gas station. If you buy a piece of property that has an environmental problem, whether you caused it or not, you're stuck. Okay? You have to take care of it. As a business person, you also have to be concerned about antitrust laws, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act. Can't have exclusive agreements. You can't say you can only buy this. Now, at NJIT, if you've been on campus, you'll notice you won't find Coca-Cola. You only find Pepsi. Was this in violation of the Clayton Act? No. Pepsi did not say that you can't buy from Coca-Cola. You can't have Coke machines here. What they did say was, if you deal exclusively with us, we will give you a terrific deal. And they did. Okay? Nothing illegal about that. Just that you can't force the person to do it, but you can make it worth their while. The last thing down there is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This had to do with what we talked about earlier in the finance piece of pro forma and cooking the books. And after Enron and WorldCom and a few others like that, laws were passed to really curtail some of the games that were being played with financial reporting. Lastly, when we look at business, we have to look at product safety. There's a thing called the Consumer Product Safety Act. And again, we've seen a lot of that lately, things coming out, things coming from other places that have bad stuff in it, that's tainted meat, that put the one New Jersey meat company out of business. All right, that's a problem, and there are some severe penalties there. Again, you have to put disclaimers and warnings. Hot coffee, I certainly hope so, but now you got to put the warning on the cup in English and Spanish so that people don't sue you because they got burned by the hot coffee. Again, we mentioned warranties. If you have a warranty on your product or service, spell it out and disclaim. There are two things under the Uniform Commercial Code. There's something called a warranty of merchantability and a warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. You should, in your boilerplate, on your product, on your contract, disclaim that, because if you don't specify what your warranty is and you don't disclaim them, the law will give you some warranties that you may not want to live with. So again, be a little careful. All right, this module is a little long, but we will next talk about intellectual property, and which includes the 5 areas, including licensing. So I'll see you at the next module.